Welcome to Moonlight Temple. Tonight, I'm going to share something that will completely change how you think about your own peace and happiness. And it might surprise you to learn it comes from a 1,000-year-old Zen teaching that most people have never heard of. Whether you came here desperately seeking better sleep, feeling overwhelmed by life's constant stress, or simply sensing there's something missing that you can't quite name, what you're about to discover has been quietly waiting for you all along. If it feels right, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening right now. Are you lying in bed at 2 a.m., mind racing with tomorrow's worries? Maybe you're curled up on your couch after another exhausting day, feeling like you're running on empty. There's something powerful about knowing we're all connected in this moment, people from different countries and time zones, all seeking the same thing, that deep, lasting peace that seems to slip away just when we need it most. Go ahead and get completely comfortable. Adjust those pillows, pull up that soft blanket, dim the lights, because what happens next works best when your body can truly relax. Here's what most people don't realize about stress, anxiety, and that constant feeling of searching for something more. You've probably tried meditation apps, self-help books, maybe even therapy, and while they might help temporarily, that underlying restlessness keeps coming back. Tonight, you're going to understand why, and more importantly, you're going to discover the ancient map that shows exactly how to find your way home to lasting peace. The teaching we're exploring together is called the 10 ox herding pictures, and it's unlike anything you've encountered before. These aren't abstract religious concepts that require years of study. They're actually a precise map of the human journey, from confusion to clarity, from that heavy feeling of something's wrong to genuine, unshakable peace. Every single person who has ever felt lost, overwhelmed, or like they're just going through the motions of life will recognize themselves in these stages. And here's the part that might surprise you. You're already further along this path than you think. What makes this teaching so extraordinary is its profound simplicity. While our modern world drowns us in complexity and endless choices, these ancient truths cut straight through to what actually matters. They speak to something deep within you, that quiet knowing that there's more to life than what appears on the surface, more than the endless cycle of working and worrying and trying to find happiness in things that never quite deliver. As we walk through these 10 stages together over the next 3 hours, something beautiful is going to happen. You don't need to memorize anything, take notes, or even stay awake for every word. Like water slowly wearing smooth a rough stone, these ancient truths will gently work their way into your consciousness, creating shifts you might not even notice until days or weeks from now. The story unfolds through the metaphor of an ox and an ox herder, and this isn't just poetic imagery, it's a brilliant psychological map. In ancient times, oxen were precious animals, strong and essential for survival, but also wild and difficult to manage. In our story, the ox represents something you might not even believe exists right now, your true, peaceful nature. That calm, wise, naturally content part of you that's been buried under years of stress, expectations, and the constant noise of modern life. The ox herder is your everyday mind, the part that's been working so incredibly hard to find happiness, that worries about tomorrow and replays yesterday, that's been searching everywhere except the one place where peace actually lives. Here's what's going to unfold tonight and why it matters so much. You'll discover why that feeling of searching never goes away, no matter what you achieve or acquire. You'll understand the precise moment when everything shifts from struggle to flow. And most surprisingly, you'll learn why the peace you're seeking isn't something you need to create. It's something you need to stop covering up. The Buddha once said something that will make perfect sense by the end of tonight. What you seek is seeking you. This isn't mystical poetry. It's pointing to a truth about your own nature that changes everything once you see it clearly. Our journey begins not in some distant monastery, but exactly where you are right now, in the everyday world where we all live and struggle and wonder if there's really a way out of the endless cycle of stress and searching. Close your eyes if that feels good, and let's discover together what's been waiting for you all along. Our first stage opens with a scene that might feel achingly familiar. Picture yourself standing in a vast pasture, surrounded by tall grass that seems to stretch endlessly in every direction. The sun is setting, casting long shadows across the land, and there's a person there. Let's call them the seeker, because that's exactly what they are, and what you are, and what we all are, in our deepest moments of honesty. This person stands there experiencing something that millions of us know all too well, something our busy culture teaches us to avoid at all costs. They feel completely, utterly lost. But this isn't the kind of lost you feel when you take a wrong turn driving home from work. This isn't even the disorientation you might feel in a new city without your phone's GPS. This is something much deeper, much more unsettling, and paradoxically much more sacred. This is the kind of loss that comes when you suddenly realize that the life you've been living, the goals you've been chasing, the things you thought would make you happy, none of it is working the way you expected. The seeker in our story has been pushing aside tall grasses for what feels like forever, searching desperately for something. Here's what makes this so relatable. They don't even know exactly what they're looking for. They just know with absolute certainty that something crucial is missing. Their strength is failing, their energy completely exhausted. They followed so many paths that led nowhere, climbed so many mountains that revealed only more mountains stretching endlessly beyond. Does this sound familiar? Maybe you've felt this way after achieving something you worked years for, only to discover that the satisfaction lasted about as long as a good meal. Maybe it hit you during a quiet moment, when you realized you'd been running so fast toward goals that you forgot to ask whether they were actually taking you where you wanted to go. Or perhaps it crept up slowly, like a persistent question you kept pushing away. Is this really it? In our modern world, this feeling shows up in countless ways. You might recognize it as the Sunday night anxiety that no amount of weekend relaxation seems to cure. It's the feeling of scrolling through social media for the 100th time today, looking for something that isn't there. It's lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering why you feel so empty, despite having everything you thought you wanted. It's the realization that you've been solving the same problems over and over, but the deeper problem, the one underneath all the others, never seems to get addressed. The Buddhist tradition has a specific name for this stage, and when you hear it, you might be surprised. They call it the Great Doubt. Now, our culture teaches us that doubt is weakness, that certainty is strength, that successful people know exactly where they're going at all times. But Zen Buddhism sees something completely different in this experience of profound uncertainty. They see it as a blessing, as the first stirring of genuine wisdom, as the moment when you finally stop believing the stories that have been keeping you trapped. Think about it this way. If you're lost in a forest but you think you know exactly where you are, you'll keep walking confidently in the wrong direction. But if you admit you're lost, if you stop and really acknowledge your situation, then for the first time you can actually begin to find your way home. The Great Doubt is that moment of stopping, of honest acknowledgement, of finally admitting that the map you've been using doesn't match the territory of your actual life. The Buddha himself went through this exact stage before his awakening. He was a prince with literally everything anyone could want: wealth beyond measure, power, pleasure, complete security from life's ordinary hardships. By every external measure, he had won the game of life before he was 30. But then something happened that changed everything. He saw old age for the first time, witnessed sickness, encountered death. Suddenly, all his privileges felt like beautiful decorations on a house that was slowly collapsing. He realized that no amount of wealth or power could protect him from the fundamental challenges that touch every human life. That realization launched him into his own version of standing in the tall grass, searching for something he couldn't name. He tried extreme asceticism, nearly starving himself to death. He studied with the greatest teachers of his time. He practiced meditation until he could achieve states of consciousness most people can't even imagine. But something was still missing, and it wasn't until he stopped trying so hard that he finally found what he'd been seeking all along. This brings us to one of the most important insights about this first stage. The Great Doubt isn't actually about being confused. It's about realizing you've been confused. It's the difference between being unconsciously lost and consciously lost. When you're unconsciously lost, you keep making the same mistakes over and over, thinking that if you just try harder, want more, achieve better, eventually you'll find satisfaction. But when you become consciously lost, when you enter the Great Doubt, you finally stop and ask the most important question of your life. What if I've been looking in all the wrong places? This question is revolutionary because our entire culture is built on the assumption that happiness comes from external things. Get the right job, find the right relationship, buy the right house, achieve the right status, and then you'll be happy. But here's what the Great Doubt reveals. You've probably tried that approach already, maybe multiple times, and somehow the happiness keeps slipping away. The promotion comes with new stresses. The relationship requires constant maintenance. The house needs repairs. The status feels empty once you have it. And slowly, quietly, that voice inside starts asking, is there something I'm missing here? In Zen Buddhism, They tell a story about a man who loses his keys inside his house, but goes outside to look for them under the street light, because that's where the light is better. When someone asks him why he's not looking inside where he dropped them, he says, "But it's so much brighter out here." The great doubt is the moment when you finally admit you've been looking under the streetlight for keys you dropped inside the house. It's uncomfortable because the house is darker, less familiar, but it's also the only place where you'll actually find what you're looking for. What makes this stage so challenging in our current time is how our culture responds to the great doubt. We're offered endless distractions, streaming services, social media, shopping, busy work schedules, anything to avoid that quiet moment when we might have to face the fundamental questions. We're told that if we're feeling empty or restless, we need more therapy, more medication, more activities, more goals. Sometimes these things help temporarily, but they don't address the core issue that the great doubt is trying to show us. The core issue is this: we've been taught to seek lasting satisfaction in temporary things. It's like trying to quench your thirst by drinking salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Every external achievement, every pleasurable experience, every moment of recognition or success gives you a taste of something wonderful, but then it fades, and you find yourself searching again. The great doubt is your inner wisdom finally saying, maybe the problem isn't that I'm not getting enough salt water. Maybe the problem is that I'm trying to satisfy a deep thirst with something that can't actually satisfy it. But here's where this teaching becomes truly beautiful and hopeful. The Buddha taught that the great doubt, uncomfortable as it is, points directly towards something called the First Noble Truth. The First Noble Truth isn't pessimistic or depressing, even though it might sound that way at first. It simply states that life, as ordinarily lived, contains suffering, dissatisfaction, a persistent sense that something isn't quite right. This isn't a judgment or a cosmic mistake. It's just an accurate description of what happens when we try to find lasting happiness in temporary things. The beauty of recognizing this truth is that it stops you from thinking you're doing something wrong personally. You're not broken, you're not failing at life, you're not uniquely damaged or inadequate. You're simply experiencing what every human experiences when they try to satisfy infinite longing with finite things. It's like trying to fill up the ocean with a garden hose. The problem isn't with your technique, it's with the fundamental approach. Many people spend their entire lives never reaching this stage of recognition. They stay submerged in what Zen calls the life of the herd, mistaking conformity and busyness for genuine satisfaction. They keep trying different variations of the same basic strategy: achieve more, acquire more, experience more, and somehow happiness will finally stick. But you, sitting here listening to this right now, have already moved beyond that. The very fact that you're seeking something deeper, that you're willing to spend 3 hours exploring ancient wisdom, means you've already entered the great doubt. You've already begun to question whether the conventional approach to happiness actually works. This might feel scary at first, like standing at the edge of a vast ocean when you're not sure you know how to swim. The familiar shore of trying to solve your problems through external means might seem safer, even if it hasn't been working. But here's what the tradition promises. This doubt, this sense of being lost, this feeling that everything you thought you knew about finding happiness might be wrong, this isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning. It's the first step on a journey that leads to something more stable, more peaceful, more genuinely satisfying than anything you've experienced before. In ancient times, people in this stage were often called seekers, and that word carried deep respect. To be a seeker meant you had the courage to acknowledge that surface-level solutions weren't enough for you. It meant you were willing to question not just your circumstances, but your fundamental assumptions about how life works. It meant you had enough inner honesty to admit when something wasn't working, even if that something was your entire approach to finding happiness. The seeker in our story, standing in that vast pasture as the sun sets, represents every person who has ever felt this way. They represent the millions of people who lie awake at night, wondering if there's more to life than the endless cycle of wanting and getting and wanting something else. They represent everyone who has achieved their goals, only to find themselves asking, "Now what?" They represent you in your most honest moments, when you stop pretending that everything is fine and admit that you're searching for something you can't quite name. But here's the profound truth that makes this stage not just bearable, but actually hopeful. The very capacity to feel lost in this way is actually a sign of something extraordinary within you. Animals don't experience existential doubt. They eat when they're hungry, sleep when they're tired, mate when it's time, and they seem perfectly content with that. The fact that you can feel unsatisfied even when your basic needs are met, the fact that you can sense there's something more to existence than just survival and pleasure, this isn't a flaw. It's evidence of a deeper intelligence within you, a wisdom that knows you're capable of something greater than just going through the motions of life. As we close this first stage, take a moment to appreciate where you are right now. If you're feeling that sense of searching, that gentle or not so gentle dissatisfaction with how things have been going, if you're questioning whether the path you've been on is really taking you where you want to go, honor that feeling. Don't try to talk yourself out of it or distract yourself from it. That feeling is your inner wisdom speaking, and it's preparing to show you something beautiful. The seeker in our story doesn't know it yet, but their time of aimless wandering is about to change. Something is stirring, something that will give their search direction and hope. And the same is true for you. The great doubt isn't the end of your journey. It's the moment when your real journey finally begins. Something shifts as our seeker continues their journey through the tall grass and winding paths. The despair and confusion of that first stage begins to crack open, like the first thin line of light appearing on the horizon before dawn. They're walking along a riverbank now, the water flowing gently beside them, and suddenly they stop. There, pressed into the soft earth beneath the trees, clear as day, are footprints. Not just any footprints, these are different, purposeful, heading in a specific direction. The seeker kneels down and traces the outline with their finger, and for the first time in what feels like forever, something inside them leaps with recognition. Someone else has been here. Someone else has walked this path before. Most importantly, someone else was heading somewhere specific, with intention, with direction. This moment represents one of the most crucial turning points in any person's spiritual journey, and you've probably experienced it yourself without even realizing it. Maybe it happened when you read a book that seemed to understand exactly what you were going through, as if the author had somehow been inside your mind. Maybe it was a conversation with a friend who casually mentioned something that struck you like lightning, not because it was complex or dramatic, but because it was so simple and true that you wondered how you'd never seen it before. Or perhaps it was a moment in nature when the ordinary world suddenly seemed to crack open and show you something vast and peaceful underneath. These are the footprints of wisdom, and they appear everywhere once you start looking for them. They're in the poetry that makes you stop reading and stare out the window for 10 minutes, trying to absorb what you just encountered. They're in the songs that somehow capture exactly what you've been feeling but couldn't put into words. They're in those random moments when a stranger's kindness touches something deep in your heart, or when you witness something beautiful that reminds you there's still goodness in the world. The original Zen poem describes finding these traces even under fragrant grass, even in the most remote mountains. What this means is that once you've entered the great doubt, once you've admitted you're lost and need a different kind of guidance, the signs start appearing everywhere. It's not that they weren't there before, it's that you weren't looking for them. You were too busy trying to figure everything out on your own, too convinced that if you just worked harder or wanted things more intensely, you'd eventually find your way. But now, something has changed. The frustration and exhaustion of the first stage has made you humble enough to consider that maybe, just maybe, you don't have to figure this out alone. Maybe there are people who have walked this path before, who have felt exactly what you're feeling, who have found their way through the confusion to something real and lasting. Maybe their footprints are still visible, if you know how to look. In Buddhist teaching, this stage corresponds to what's called the third noble truth. Remember, the first noble truth was recognizing that life as ordinarily lived contains suffering and dissatisfaction. That was the great doubt, the honest acknowledgement that something fundamental wasn't working. The third noble truth is the recognition that this suffering can actually end. Not just be managed or reduced or medicated, but actually transformed into something else entirely. This might seem like a small step forward, but it's actually revolutionary. Think about how many people get stuck in cynicism, in the belief that life is just hard and that's the end of the story. They acknowledge that things aren't working, they're not in denial, but they conclude that this is just how life is. Everyone struggles, everyone's stressed, everyone's searching for something they'll never find, so you might as well just accept it and try to distract yourself as much as possible. But discovering the footprints changes everything. It says that yes, life contains difficulty, but that difficulty isn't the final word. Yes, the conventional approach to happiness often leaves us feeling empty, but there's another approach that actually works. Yes, you might feel lost right now, But you're not the first person to feel this way, and you won't be the first person to find your way home. The footprints appear in the most unexpected places. Sometimes they show up in ancient texts that somehow speak directly to your modern problems. The Buddha lived 500 years ago, yet when he describes the restless mind that jumps from thought to thought like a monkey swinging from branch to branch, you know exactly what he means. Sometimes they appear in the words of contemporary teachers who've learned to speak ancient wisdom in modern language, helping you understand that spiritual practice isn't about escaping from life, but about showing up for it more fully. Art becomes a carrier of these footprints. You're walking through a museum and stop in front of a painting that somehow captures the exact feeling you've been carrying but couldn't express. Or you're listening to music, and there's a melody that seems to come from the same deep place where your longing lives. These aren't coincidences. They're evidence that the same wisdom that exists within you has been recognized and expressed by countless people throughout history. You're not alone in your searching, and you're not the first person to sense that there's something more to existence than what appears on the surface. Nature itself becomes a teacher once you start paying attention. You're walking in the woods, and notice how the trees don't seem to be struggling or striving. They're just being trees, completely themselves, growing toward the light with a kind of effortless purpose. Or you're sitting by the ocean, and something about the rhythm of the waves, their endless coming and going without any sense of urgency or frustration, speaks to a part of you that knows how to live with that same natural flow. These moments don't give you answers exactly, but they give you something even more valuable. The felt sense that peace is possible, that there's a way of being in the world that doesn't require constant effort and anxiety. Sometimes the footprints appear through other people. You meet someone who seems to carry a quality of presence that you can't quite describe, but immediately recognize. They're not trying to impress you or convince you of anything. They're not frantically busy or obviously stressed. And there's something about being around them that makes you feel more calm and centered yourself. You might not even have a long conversation with them, but their very presence reminds you that it's possible to move through life with a different quality of energy, a different relationship to whatever challenges arise. The Zen teaching describes these footprints as impossible to hide, no more than one's nose looking heavenward. What this means is that once you're really looking, once you've developed the eyes to see, the evidence of wisdom and possibility is everywhere. It's as obvious as the nose on your face, as unavoidable as the sky above your head. But here's the key. You have to be actually looking. You have to have reached the point where you're genuinely seeking something different, not just complaining about how things are. This is where many people get confused about spiritual seeking. They think it means rejecting the ordinary world and going off to live in a cave somewhere. But the footprints appear right here in ordinary life, in the middle of your regular days and normal struggles. You don't have to quit your job or move to a monastery to find them. You just have to start paying attention with a different quality of awareness, looking for signs that peace and wisdom and genuine satisfaction might actually be possible. Dreams become another place where footprints appear. You might have a dream that doesn't make logical sense, but leaves you with a feeling of deep recognition, as if some part of you remembers something your everyday mind has forgotten. Or you might dream about flying, or being in a beautiful place, or meeting someone wise, and wake up with the sense that the dream was pointing towards something real and accessible, not just random brain activity. The psychologist Carl Jung wrote extensively about how the unconscious mind naturally nudges us toward growth and wholeness, sending us symbols and experiences that guide us toward our deeper potential. Synchronicities start happening more frequently. You think about a question that's been bothering you, and then you overhear a conversation on the bus that seems to address it directly. You're struggling with a particular challenge, and then you stumble across an article or podcast that offers exactly the perspective you needed. These meaningful coincidences aren't magic, but they're not random either. They're signs that you're starting to live with more openness and awareness, more receptive to the guidance that's always available when you're genuinely seeking. But here's something crucial to understand about this stage. Finding the footprints gives you hope and direction, but it doesn't immediately solve all your problems. You're still walking along the riverbank, still searching, still dealing with all the ordinary challenges of human life. The difference is that now you have evidence that others have found what you're looking for. You have glimpses of possibility, moments when the clouds part, and you can see that there really is something beyond the confusion and struggle. Christ spoke directly to this stage when he said, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." This isn't a promise that you'll get everything you want if you just ask nicely enough. It's pointing to something much deeper, that when you seek with genuine sincerity, when you ask the right questions from a place of real openness, the universe begins to respond. Not always in the way you expect, but always in the way you actually need. The key word here is initiative. You can't just passively wait for wisdom to find you while you continue living exactly as you always have. You have to start actively looking, reading, listening, exploring. You have to be willing to have conversations you wouldn't normally have, try practices you might have dismissed before, pay attention to things you used to ignore. This doesn't mean becoming obsessed or frantically searching. That's just another form of the same restless energy that got you lost in the first place. It means living with a quality of open curiosity, staying alert for the footprints that point towards something deeper. This stage requires both patience and persistence. The footprints don't appear on your schedule or according to your timeline. Sometimes you'll go weeks feeling like you're making no progress at all, and then suddenly something will click into place and you'll understand something that changes how you see everything. Sometimes the guidance comes through sources you would never have expected. A child's innocent comment, a line in a movie, something you notice about how light falls through your window at a particular time of day. What's happening during this stage is that you're developing what spiritual traditions call the eyes to see and ears to hear. You're learning to recognize wisdom and truth wherever they appear, rather than only looking in the places you think they should be. You're becoming more sensitive to the subtle currents of meaning and possibility that flow through ordinary life, but that most people miss because they're too busy or distracted or convinced that only dramatic, obvious things are worth paying attention to. The seeker in our story kneels by those footprints in the soft earth and feels something shift inside them. The aimless wandering isn't over yet, but it's no longer completely aimless. There's a direction now, a sense that they're on a path that leads somewhere real. And perhaps most importantly, there's the profound relief of knowing they're not the first person to walk this way. Others have been here before, others have found what they're looking for, and that knowledge fills them with something they hadn't felt for a long time. Hope. This is where you are now, if you recognize yourself in this stage. The despair and confusion of the great doubt hasn't disappeared entirely, but it's been joined by something new, the growing certainty that there really is a way forward, that the peace and understanding you're seeking isn't just a fantasy or wishful thinking. The footprints are everywhere once you learn to see them, and each one you discover makes you more confident that you're moving in the right direction. You're no longer just wandering aimlessly through tall grass. You're following a path that others have walked before you, a path that leads somewhere you very much want to go. The moment arrives like sunrise after the longest night. Our seeker, having followed those precious footprints for what feels like months or maybe years, suddenly stops walking. The air around them seems different somehow, warmer, more alive, filled with sounds they've never noticed before. A nightingale is singing somewhere nearby, its voice clear and sweet, and for the first time in their entire journey, the seeker's mind becomes completely still. In that stillness, something extraordinary happens. The tall grass parts slightly, and there, massive and beautiful and undeniably real, stands the ox. Not hiding anymore, not a distant hope or theoretical possibility, but right there, breathing, present, looking back at the seeker with eyes that seem both ancient and utterly familiar. This is the moment that changes everything, and if you've been on any kind of spiritual journey, you've probably tasted something like this yourself. Maybe it happened during meditation when your busy mind suddenly became quiet, and you found yourself resting in a space of pure awareness that felt more like home than anywhere you'd ever been. Maybe it occurred in nature when you looked at a sunset or felt the ocean breeze and suddenly understood, without any words or explanations, that you were connected to something vast and loving and eternal. Or perhaps it came during a moment of crisis, when all your usual ways of coping fell away, and you discovered a strength and peace within yourself that you never knew existed. In Zen Buddhism, this experience has a specific name, Kensho. It literally means seeing into one's true nature, and it represents the first direct glimpse of what you really are beneath all the layers of conditioning, worry, and self-doubt. This isn't an intellectual understanding or a belief you adopt. It's a direct recognition, as immediate and undeniable as recognizing your own face in a mirror. Suddenly, you see that the peaceful, wise, naturally content essence you've been searching for everywhere wasn't hiding somewhere else at all. It was always right here, closer than your own breath, more intimate than your own thoughts. The original Zen poem describes this moment beautifully. The sun is warm, the wind is mild, willows are green along the shore. Here no ox can hide. What this means is that when your perception finally becomes clear, when the seeking mind settles into genuine presence, your true nature becomes as obvious as the sun in the sky. It's not that it was ever actually hidden. It's that you were looking in all the wrong directions, trying to find something that was never lost. The commentary goes even deeper. As soon as the six senses merge, the gate is entered. In ordinary consciousness, we experience ourselves as separate from what we're perceiving. There's you, and then there's the world out there. Sounds, sights, sensations, thoughts, all appearing to happen to someone standing apart from them. But in this moment of recognition, that sense of separation dissolves. You realize that the awareness in which all these experiences are appearing isn't separate from them at all. It's like discovering that the space in which clouds appear isn't different from the sky. The clouds and the sky are one seamless reality. This unity is described as being like salt in water, like color in dye stuff. When you dissolve salt in water, you can't point to where the salt ends and the water begins. They become one substance. When dye colors fabric, the color and the cloth aren't two separate things. They're one colored cloth. In the same way, this moment of recognition shows you that your essential nature and your immediate experience aren't two different things. They're one seamless awareness, one undivided reality expressing itself as everything you see, hear, feel, and know. But here's where this teaching becomes both profound and practical for modern life. This recognition doesn't happen in some special spiritual realm, separate from your ordinary existence. It happens right here, right now, in the middle of whatever you're experiencing. You might be sitting in traffic when suddenly the frustration drops away, and you see that even this moment, even this ordinary Tuesday afternoon annoyance, is appearing in the same perfect awareness that contains everything else. Or you might be washing dishes when you notice that the warm water, the simple repetitive motion, the feeling of accomplishing something small and necessary, all of it is happening in a space of natural contentment that doesn't depend on the circumstances being any different than they are. This is what makes Kensho so revolutionary. Most spiritual seeking is based on the assumption that you need to get somewhere else, become someone else, achieve some special state that's different from what's here now. But this moment of direct recognition shows you that what you've been seeking has been present all along, hidden not by its absence, but by its very intimacy. It's like spending years searching for your glasses while they're sitting on your head, not lost, just so close you couldn't see them. In early Buddhism, there's a parallel teaching called stream entry. Once you've had this direct glimpse of your unconditioned nature, once you've seen that there really is something beyond the constant mental chatter and emotional turbulence, you've entered what they call the stream of awakening. The Buddha taught that someone who enters the stream is guaranteed to realize complete liberation within 7 lifetimes. But here's the important question. What's the difference between someone who has entered the stream and someone who is fully awakened? The tradition offers a perfect analogy. Imagine you're walking through a desert, desperately thirsty, and you come across a well. You look down into the well and you can clearly see the water at the bottom. Cool, clear, exactly what you need. You have perfect knowledge that the water exists. You can see it right there, but you still can't drink it because you don't have a rope or bucket to draw it up. Stream entry is like seeing the water clearly for the first time. Full awakening is like actually drinking it. This analogy helps explain something that confuses many people about spiritual experience. You can have a profound moment of recognition, a clear glimpse of your true nature, and then find yourself an hour later feeling frustrated or anxious, or caught up in the same old patterns that have always troubled you. This doesn't mean the recognition was false, or that you're somehow failing spiritually. It just means you've seen the water, but haven't yet learned how to consistently access it. You've had the glimpse, but you haven't yet developed the rope and bucket, the understanding and skills that allow you to live from that recognition consistently. This is why the Zen map shows that perceiving the ox is only the 3rd stage out of 10. It's a crucial breakthrough, absolutely essential, but it's not the end of the journey. In fact, the teaching warns that this is where many people get stuck, thinking they've completed the path when they've barely begun. The excitement of finally seeing what you've been looking for can be so intense, so relieving, that you want to stop right here and just bask in the recognition. There's a particular kind of spiritual pride that can develop at this stage. You've seen something that many people never see, had an experience that's genuinely transformative, and it's natural to feel like you've achieved something special. You might find yourself thinking, I get it now. I understand what all those spiritual teachers were talking about. I've had my awakening. And while the recognition is real and important, mistaking it for the completion of the path can actually become an obstacle to going deeper. The truth is that seeing the ox clearly is like falling in love. It's the beginning of a relationship, not the end of one. When you first fall in love, everything feels magical and effortless. You can't imagine ever arguing with this person or feeling anything but complete harmony with them. But anyone who's been in a long-term relationship knows that falling in love is just the first step. Learning to actually live in love, through all the ordinary moments and inevitable challenges, that's the real work. The same is true with spiritual recognition. Having the glimpse is extraordinary and necessary, but learning to live from that recognition consistently, especially when life gets difficult or boring or overwhelming, that requires a different kind of development. It requires what the next stages of the path will teach: discipline, patience, the willingness to keep showing up, even when the initial excitement fades and the work becomes more subtle and demanding. But let's not minimize what happens at this stage, because it really is revolutionary. For perhaps the first time in your life, you taste what it's like to be completely present without needing anything to be different. You experience a kind of contentment that doesn't depend on your circumstances, a peace that isn't the opposite of conflict but something deeper that can hold all experiences without being disturbed by any of them. You discover that your essential nature isn't small or limited or damaged, but vast and naturally wise and infinitely compassionate. This recognition often comes with what people describe as a profound sense of coming home. Not home to a place, but home to yourself, to who you really are beneath all the roles and identities and stories you've been carrying. It's like taking off shoes that have been too tight for so long that you forgot what it felt like to walk comfortably. Suddenly you remember what ease feels like, what it's like to move through life without constantly bracing against experience. Many people report that colors seem brighter after this recognition, that music sounds richer, that food tastes more vivid. This isn't because the external world has changed, but because you're perceiving it from a place of natural aliveness that isn't filtered through the constant mental commentary about whether you like or dislike what's happening. You're experiencing life directly, immediately, the way a child experiences ice cream on a summer day, completely absorbed, completely present, without any part of you standing apart and analyzing the experience. The teaching says that what artist can draw that massive head, those majestic horns? This points to something crucial about this stage. The recognition itself is beyond description, beyond the reach of concepts and words. You can talk about it, you can point toward it, you can share what the experience was like, but the reality itself can never be captured in language. It's like trying to paint the taste of chocolate or write a song about the color blue. The most beautiful art and poetry and music can evoke something similar, can remind you of the recognition, but they can never contain it. This is why spiritual traditions often seem to speak in paradoxes and contradictions. How do you describe something that's simultaneously the most obvious thing in the world and completely beyond ordinary understanding? How do you point to something that's more intimate than your own thoughts but also more vast than the universe? The only way is through metaphor, through poetry, through stories like the one we're exploring together right now. The ox, the seeking, the footprints, none of these are literal descriptions, but they point towards something that can be recognized even if it can't be explained. What's particularly beautiful about this stage is how it reframes everything that came before. The confusion and despair of the great doubt suddenly make perfect sense. They were the necessary shaking that loosened your grip on all the things that weren't actually working. The searching and following of footprints wasn't wasted effort. It was the process of becoming humble enough and sincere enough to actually see what was always present. Every wrong turn, every moment of frustration, every time you thought you were getting nowhere, all of it was part of the journey that led you to this moment of recognition. And here's something that might surprise you about this stage. Often, the moment of seeing the ox isn't dramatic or mystical in the way you might expect. You might be sitting quietly and simply notice that the sense of seeking has dropped away, replaced by a quality of being that feels both completely new and utterly familiar. Or you might be doing something completely ordinary, making coffee, walking the dog, having a conversation, when you suddenly realize that what you've been looking for everywhere else has been present in this simple moment all along. The recognition often comes with a gentle laugh, the kind of laugh you might have when you find your car keys in your pocket after searching the whole house for them. Of course, you think, how could I have missed something so obvious? But then you realize that you couldn't have seen it before because you weren't ready. All that searching, all that confusion, all that effort, it wasn't a mistake. It was exactly what was needed to bring you to the point where you could finally stop looking long enough to see what was already here. As this third stage comes to a close, our seeker stands in the meadow, finally face to face with what they've been seeking all along. The ox is magnificent, peaceful, clearly visible, no longer hiding behind the tall grass or distant mountains. But as the seeker reaches out to touch this beautiful creature, the ox steps back slightly, and the seeker realizes something important. Seeing is one thing. Catching is going to be something else entirely. The honeymoon is over. Our seeker, having glimpsed the magnificent ox in all its beauty and presence, now faces a reality that no amount of spiritual reading or inspiring conversations could have prepared them for. The ox, while no longer hiding, has no intention of simply standing there waiting to be approached. The moment the seeker reaches out, the ox moves away, not in fear, but with a kind of wild power that says, if you want this, you're going to have to work for it. What follows is described in the ancient poem as a terrific struggle. The ox's will and power seem inexhaustible. It charges to high plateaus far above the clouds, then disappears into impenetrable ravines where the seeker can barely follow. Just when you think you've gotten close, just when you feel like you're making progress, the ox bounds away again, leaving you exhausted and wondering if you'll ever be able to bridge the gap between seeing and actually living from what you've seen. If you've ever tried to establish a meditation practice, you know exactly what this feels like. Maybe you had a beautiful experience during your first few sits, a taste of that natural peace and presence you glimpsed in the third stage. But then you try to recreate it the next day, and instead of peace, you find your mind more restless than ever. Instead of clarity, you encounter what feels like a hurricane of thoughts, emotions, and physical discomfort. The ox that seemed so accessible yesterday now feels impossibly distant, and you begin to wonder if that initial glimpse was just a fluke. Or perhaps you've experienced this struggle in trying to bring spiritual understanding into your daily relationships. In moments of quiet reflection, it's easy to feel compassionate toward everyone, to see clearly how your reactions create unnecessary suffering. But then someone cuts you off in traffic, or your partner leaves dishes in the sink again, or your boss sends that passive-aggressive email, and suddenly all your spiritual insights seem to evaporate. The reactive patterns you thought you'd outgrown come roaring back with a vengeance, and you find yourself wondering if you've made any real progress at all. This stage represents one of the most challenging aspects of any genuine spiritual path, and it's where many people either give up entirely or get stuck in a cycle of endless seeking without ever committing to the actual work. Some spiritual teachers, particularly those influenced by teachers like Jiddu Krishnamurti, argue that any form of spiritual effort is fundamentally misguided. They point out, quite correctly, that the very act of striving builds up the sense of a separate self that's trying to achieve something, the exact opposite of what true awakening reveals. How can you make effort to realize what you already are? It's like trying to catch your own shadow or lift yourself up by pulling on your shoelaces. But Zen Buddhism, in its practical wisdom, recognizes something crucial about human psychology and the nature of transformation. While it's true that your essential nature is already perfect and complete, while it's true that what you're seeking is always already present, there's usually a tremendous amount of conditioning, habit, and unconscious patterning that obscures this recognition. These patterns didn't develop overnight, and they don't dissolve simply because you've had a glimpse of something deeper. They require patient, consistent work to unravel. Think of it like this. Imagine your true nature as a beautiful piece of furniture that's been painted over again and again for decades. The original wood is still there underneath, perfect and unmarked, but you can't see it through all those layers of paint. Having a spiritual glimpse is like scraping away a small section and seeing the beautiful grain underneath. But if you want to reveal the whole piece, you're going to need to keep scraping, patiently and carefully, until all the old paint has been removed. The stripping process doesn't create the beautiful wood, it just reveals what was always there. This is why the Buddha taught what's called right effort as one of the essential elements of the spiritual path. Right effort isn't the desperate striving of the ego trying to achieve something for itself. It's more like the steady, patient work of a gardener who knows that creating the right conditions will allow what's naturally trying to grow to flourish. You don't make a flower bloom by pulling on its petals, but you do need to water it, give it proper soil, and remove the weeds that might compete for nutrients. The effort required at this stage is essentially the effort of paying attention. Buddhism teaches that the mind is originally pure, radiant, and naturally awakened. Awakening, then, isn't something you need to acquire from somewhere else. It's something you need to uncover within yourself by seeing through all the mental and emotional patterns that obscure your natural clarity. This uncovering happens through the simple but challenging practice of awareness, paying attention to all the movements of the body-mind until the body-mind becomes transparent and reveals what Zen calls your original face. Your original face is who you were before your parents were born, before the world came into being, before all the stories and identities and conditioning that make up your sense of being a separate person. It's not another experience to have or state to achieve. It's the aware presence in which all experiences appear and disappear. But recognizing this presence consistently, especially when you're caught up in strong emotions or challenging circumstances, requires what feels like tremendous effort initially. The teaching offers a perfect analogy for understanding this apparent contradiction between effort and effortlessness. When you're learning to ride a bicycle, you need training wheels. The training wheels don't teach you how to balance. Balance is something your body knows how to do naturally once it learns the new paradigm for movement. But the training wheels provide stability while your nervous system adapts, while your muscles develop the subtle adjustments that riding requires. Eventually, the day comes when you take off the training wheels and discover you can ride freely, effortlessly, without any external support. Spiritual practices work the same way. Meditation, mindfulness, prayer, contemplative reading, these aren't ends in themselves, and they don't create awakening. But they provide the stability and structure needed while your entire system learns a new way of being in relationship with experience. They help you develop the capacity to remain present and aware even when old patterns of reactivity are triggered. They train your attention to rest in awareness itself, rather than getting completely absorbed in whatever content is arising within awareness. The struggle described in this stage isn't the struggle of trying to become something you're not. It's the struggle of learning to stop being what you never were in the first place. Every time you catch yourself lost in worry about the future, you gently return attention to the present moment. Every time you notice yourself judging someone else, you pause and reconnect with the awareness that sees the judgment without being caught up in it. Every time you feel yourself contracting around difficult emotions, you practice softening and making space for whatever is arising. This process can feel frustrating because it seems like you're taking one step forward and 2 steps back. You'll have a beautiful meditation where you feel completely centered and peaceful, and then spend the rest of the day feeling reactive and scattered. You'll have insights about the nature of ego that seem profound and transformative, and then find yourself completely identified with ego patterns the next time you're triggered. The ox that seemed so close during your morning practice feels impossibly distant by evening. But here's what's actually happening during these apparent setbacks. Each time you recognize that you've been caught up in old patterns, each time you notice you've lost touch with presence and gently return, you're strengthening what could be called your awakening muscles. You're developing the capacity to step back from experience and recognize awareness itself, even in the middle of challenging circumstances. You're learning to distinguish between what you are, the aware presence that observes all experiences, and what happens within you, the thoughts, emotions, and sensations that come and go. This distinction is crucial because most of our suffering comes from identifying completely with whatever is happening in our experience. When anger arises, we think, "I am angry," rather than "anger is arising in awareness." When sadness appears, we believe, "I am sad," rather than "sadness is present, but I am the awareness in which sadness appears." When anxiety shows up, we contract into "I am anxious," rather than remaining spacious as the awareness that can hold anxiety without being disturbed by it. The training that happens in this stage gradually shifts this identification. Instead of being completely absorbed in the content of experience, you begin to recognize yourself as the context in which all content appears. Instead of being the character in the movie of your life, you begin to recognize yourself as the screen on which the movie plays, present for every scene, but never damaged by any of them. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen through understanding it intellectually. It happens through the patient, repeated practice of recognizing awareness in the midst of whatever is arising. The ox in our story charges to high plateaus and disappears into ravines because this recognition can't be grasped or controlled. You can't force yourself to be present. You can't will yourself into a state of peace, and you can't think your way out of identification with mental and emotional patterns. But you can create the conditions that make recognition more likely. You can develop the habits and practices that support awakening, even though they don't guarantee it. you can show up consistently for the work, even when it feels like you're making no progress at all. This is where many people get discouraged and either give up or start spiritual shopping, looking for an easier path, or a more charismatic teacher, or a more powerful technique. But the tradition is clear that this struggle stage is unavoidable for most people. It's not a sign that you're doing something wrong or that you're not cut out for spiritual development. It's simply what the process looks like when deep conditioning meets genuine practice. The patterns that have been running your life for decades don't give up easily, and it takes time and patience to see through them clearly enough that they lose their grip on you. What helps during this stage is remembering that the struggle isn't permanent. Just as training wheels are eventually discarded once balance is developed, the effortful aspects of practice eventually give way to something much more natural and flowing. But first, you need to develop the capacity to remain awake and aware even when life gets challenging, even when old patterns are triggered, even when the ox seems to have disappeared entirely. This capacity develops through repetition, through countless small moments of choosing awareness over unconsciousness, presence over reactivity, spaciousness over contraction. The beautiful thing about this stage is that every moment of struggle is also a moment of potential recognition. Every time you notice you're caught up in mental drama, the very noticing is awareness recognizing itself. Every time you feel yourself contracting and consciously choose to soften, you're exercising the fundamental capacity for awakening. Every time you return attention to the present moment, after being lost in thoughts about the past or future, you're strengthening your ability to live from presence rather than from the mind's endless commentary. The effort required here isn't the desperate effort of someone trying to achieve something they don't have. It's more like the patient effort of someone learning to access something they're beginning to recognize has been present all along. You're not trying to create peace. You're learning to stop disturbing the peace that's already here. You're not trying to manufacture love. You're learning to stop blocking the love that's your natural condition. You're not trying to become aware. You're learning to stop getting so lost in the content of awareness that you forget you are awareness itself. As this stage progresses, something gradually begins to shift. The periods of struggle become shorter, the returns to presence happen more quickly, and you begin to develop what could be called a spiritual immune system, the capacity to meet challenges without being completely thrown off balance. The ox still moves, still requires attention and patience, but it no longer feels impossibly wild and unmanageable. You're beginning to sense that partnership is possible, that the relationship between seeker and sought doesn't have to be one of endless chase and frustration. Our seeker, exhausted from the chase but somehow stronger for having engaged it fully, stands catching their breath as the ox pauses on a distant ridge. For the first time, the ox doesn't immediately bound away when approached. Instead, it seems to be waiting, still alert, still powerful, but no longer quite so intent on escape. The seeker realizes they've learned something crucial during all this struggle, not how to catch the ox through force, but how to approach it with the kind of patient respect that partnership requires. The next stage of their journey is about to begin. something beautiful begins to emerge as the chase gradually transforms into partnership. Our seeker, no longer exhausted from constant pursuit, finds themselves walking alongside the ox instead of always running behind it. The whip and rope are still there, still necessary sometimes when old patterns of distraction or reactivity threaten to pull them off course, but they're held lightly now, almost casually. The ox has become what the ancient poem calls naturally gentle, and for the first time in this entire journey, the seeker can actually turn their back without constantly worrying that their practice will disappear the moment they stop paying attention. If you've been meditating for a while, or working with any kind of spiritual practice consistently, you might recognize this shift. There was probably a time when sitting still for even 10 minutes felt like wrestling with a wild animal, your mind jumping from thought to thought, your body fidgeting with discomfort, every moment requiring tremendous effort just to stay present. But gradually, almost without you noticing, something shifted. The same practice that once felt like forcing yourself to do something unnatural began to feel more like coming home. Instead of having to fight for every moment of presence, you found yourself naturally settling into awareness, the way a tired person settles into a comfortable chair. This stage represents what spiritual traditions call effortless effort, a paradox that can only be understood through direct experience. The disciplines and practices that once required such determination and willpower begin to feel like natural expressions of who you're becoming. Meditation stops being something you force yourself to do and becomes something you look forward to, like taking a refreshing shower after a long day. Mindfulness throughout the day stops being a constant struggle to remember and becomes more like breathing, happening naturally, without constant conscious control. In Buddhist teaching, this shift represents the development of what's called right mindfulness, not the effortful monitoring of every thought and sensation, but a natural quality of presence that remains stable without constant maintenance. It's like the difference between learning to balance on a bicycle and actually riding one. In the learning phase, you have to think about every tiny adjustment, consciously correcting each wobble, completely focused on not falling over. But once balance becomes natural, you can ride while having a conversation, enjoying the scenery, or thinking about something completely unrelated. The balance maintains itself through a kind of embodied wisdom that operates below the level of conscious thought. What's particularly beautiful about this stage is how it affects your relationship with difficult emotions and challenging circumstances. In the earlier stages, when anger or sadness or anxiety arose, it felt like being attacked by a wild animal. You either had to fight it off or get completely overwhelmed by it. But now, these same experiences begin to feel more like weather patterns moving through the vast sky of awareness. They're still present, sometimes still intense, but they no longer threaten to completely destabilize your sense of inner peace. You've developed what could be called emotional spaciousness, the capacity to feel whatever arises without being consumed by it. This doesn't mean you become emotionally numb or detached from life. In fact, the opposite often happens. You become more sensitive, more responsive, more genuinely empathetic, because you're no longer defending yourself against the fullness of human experience. When someone you care about is suffering, you can be completely present with their pain without getting lost in anxiety about how to fix it or fear that their suffering will overwhelm you. When you're going through your own difficult time, you can acknowledge the pain fully while maintaining connection to the deeper peace that remains untouched by whatever is happening on the surface. The image of turning your back to the ox captures something profound about this stage of development. You no longer need to keep your spiritual practice under constant surveillance, checking every few minutes to see if you're still present, still peaceful, still on track. There's a growing trust in what Zen calls your originally awakened nature, the recognition that the awareness you've been cultivating through practice isn't something you create, but something you are. It doesn't need to be maintained through constant effort any more than the sun needs to be reminded to shine. This trust transforms your entire relationship with spiritual development. Instead of feeling like you're swimming upstream against the current of your own nature, you begin to sense that you're actually swimming downstream, supported by the natural flow of awakening that wants to express itself through your life. Practice becomes less about trying to achieve something and more about removing the obstacles to what's already trying to emerge. It's like clearing debris from a spring. You're not creating the water, just allowing it to flow freely. Your body begins to reflect this inner shift in tangible ways. The chronic tension that many people carry in their shoulders, their jaw, their belly, starts to soften as your nervous system learns to live from presence rather than from constant vigilance. Your breath naturally deepens and slows, not because you're trying to breathe differently, but because anxiety is no longer constricting your chest. Sleep becomes more restful, digestion improves, and you might notice that you get sick less often, as if your immune system is strengthened by the reduction in mental and emotional stress. Relationships often undergo a profound transformation during this stage. Because you're no longer constantly defending against your own experience, you become less defensive in your interactions with others. You can listen to criticism without immediately getting reactive, can witness someone else's anger without taking it personally, can offer support without getting drained by other people's problems. This doesn't make you passive or disconnected. It actually allows you to be more genuinely helpful because you're responding from wisdom rather than from your own triggered emotions. Compassion begins to arise naturally, not as something you try to cultivate, but as the spontaneous expression of recognizing your shared humanity with everyone you encounter. When you see someone acting in ways that once would have triggered judgment or irritation, you more easily recognize the suffering or confusion underneath their behavior. This doesn't mean you become a pushover or stop having boundaries, but your boundaries come from clarity rather than from defensiveness, and your responses come from love rather than from fear. The ancient poem mentions that while the rope is now loose and the ox tame, the tools of practice are still present. This points to something important about this stage. Spiritual maturity doesn't mean abandoning the practices that got you here. You still meditate, but it feels more like drinking water when you're thirsty than like taking medicine when you're sick. You still pay attention to your thoughts and emotions, but it's more like tending a garden you love than like monitoring a security system. You still make conscious choices about how to respond to challenging situations, but these choices arise from wisdom rather than from effortful self-control. However, this stage comes with its own particular temptation and potential pitfall. Because life has become so much easier, because practice now feels natural rather than forced, because you've found a sustainable way to live with much greater peace and presence, it's easy to assume you've reached the end of the spiritual path. After all, you're no longer struggling, you're no longer seeking desperately for something you don't have, and you've found a way to remain centered, even in the middle of life's ordinary challenges. What more could there be? The teaching is clear that this assumption, understandable as it is, represents a subtle form of spiritual materialism. As long as you're maintaining a relationship with your awakened nature, as long as there's still a sense of you who has achieved some level of spiritual development, there's still a fundamental duality at play. You've become a very skilled practitioner, but you're still practicing, still maintaining some distance between the seeker and what's being sought, still managing your spiritual life rather than simply being it. Think of it like learning to play a musical instrument. In the beginning, every note requires conscious effort and attention. Your fingers don't know where to go, your timing is off, and you have to think about every single movement. But gradually, with practice, playing becomes more natural and flowing. You can play familiar pieces without having to think about where to put your fingers, and you can even have conversations while you play simple songs. This is a wonderful achievement, and it represents real skill and development. But there's still a difference between being a skilled player and becoming music itself. There's still a subtle separation between the musician and the music, still a sense of someone who is playing, rather than simply being the spontaneous expression of musical creativity. The next stages of the path point toward an even more profound integration, where the boundary between the practitioner and the practice dissolves entirely. This doesn't diminish the beauty and importance of this fifth stage. The relief of no longer having to struggle constantly, the joy of discovering that spiritual development can feel natural and sustainable, the peace that comes from trusting your own awakened nature, these are genuine gifts that transform your life in countless ways. Many people live their entire lives without ever tasting this kind of integrated presence, and reaching this stage represents a profound accomplishment. But the path has its own momentum, and once you've tasted this level of ease and flow, something within you begins to sense that even this refined state of being contains a subtle limitation. It's not that anything is wrong with where you are. It's more like sensing that there are deeper layers of freedom and authenticity waiting to be discovered. The very success of your practice begins to reveal new possibilities you couldn't have imagined when you were still struggling to catch the ox. As this stage reaches its natural completion, our seeker sits peacefully beside the ox in a beautiful meadow, feeling more content and at ease than they've ever felt in their entire life. The sun is warm, the grass is soft, and for the first time since the journey began, there's no sense of urgency or striving. But as they rest there in perfect harmony with their practice, a subtle question begins to arise in the depths of their being. Is this partnership with awakening the deepest truth, or is there something even more intimate waiting to be discovered? The ox seems to sense this question too, and slowly, gently, begins to move toward home. The most extraordinary thing happens as our seeker finally stops trying to control the relationship and simply trusts. In one fluid movement, they mount the ox, and suddenly everything changes. No more chasing, no more struggling, no more careful management of the partnership they've worked so hard to develop. Now they're moving together as one being, the ox's steady rhythm carrying them both towards something that feels like the deepest possible meaning of the word home. The ancient poem captures this beautifully. Mounting the ox, slowly I return homeward. But this isn't home as a place you go to. It's home as a way of being that you finally remember. The seeker reaches for a flute they didn't even know they were carrying and begins to play. And the music that emerges isn't something they learned or practiced or tried to create. It's the spontaneous song of a life that's finally aligned with its deepest truth, and somehow everyone who hears this melody wants to join in. If you've ever experienced what athletes call being in the zone, you'll recognize something of what this stage feels like. There's that magical moment when all the years of training and practice suddenly dissolve into pure flow, when you're no longer thinking about technique or trying to perform well. You've become the performance itself. A basketball player stops aiming for the basket and becomes the arc of the ball finding its way home. A musician stops playing notes and becomes the music expressing itself through human hands. A dancer stops moving to the rhythm and becomes the rhythm moving through space and time. But this stage goes beyond even those peak experiences because it's not limited to any particular activity or context. The entire approach to living becomes creative, spontaneous, playful, and deeply authentic. You're no longer trying to live up to some image of who you should be or following rules about how spiritually developed people are supposed to behave. Instead, you're expressing something much more fundamental, the natural wisdom and compassion that emerge when a human being is completely comfortable in their own skin. In Buddhist teaching, this represents what's called right livelihood in its deepest sense. Most people think of right livelihood as simply avoiding jobs that cause harm to others, but the tradition points to something much more profound. Right livelihood means living in such complete alignment with your awakened nature that every action, every word, every choice becomes a natural expression of wisdom and love. You're not trying to be good or spiritual or enlightened. You're simply being who you really are, and who you really are turns out to be fundamentally kind, naturally creative, and spontaneously wise. This is where many people first begin to sense that they might have something to offer others who are still struggling in the earlier stages of the path. But the teaching that emerges at this stage isn't primarily through words or formal instruction. It's more like how a child's natural delight in life can remind adults of possibilities they'd forgotten, or how being around someone who's genuinely comfortable with themselves can help you relax into your own authenticity. You teach simply by being who you are, and people find themselves naturally drawn to whatever quality of presence you've learned to embody. The flute in our story represents this kind of spontaneous expression. Music has this wonderful quality of being completely structured. Every note has its precise place. Every rhythm follows mathematical principles. And yet, when played with mastery, it feels completely free and improvisational. In the same way, living from this stage means that your life becomes both perfectly ordered and completely spontaneous. You respond to each situation with exactly what's needed, but you're not following any external rules or trying to figure out the right response. The response simply arises naturally from the deep harmony between your individual expression and the larger rhythm of existence. Children often live this way naturally, which is why Jesus said, "We must become like little children to enter the kingdom of heaven." Watch a healthy child at play, and you'll see this same quality of total absorption, creative spontaneity, and unconscious wisdom in action. They're not trying to be spiritual or enlightened. They're just completely present with whatever they're doing, finding wonder and joy in the simplest things, responding to each moment with fresh curiosity rather than predetermined expectations. This stage of the spiritual path is essentially about recovering this natural capacity that most adults gradually lose as they become more concerned with managing their image and controlling outcomes. But there's something even more profound happening here than just recovering childlike spontaneity. The years of practice, the struggle with the ox, the patient development of presence and awareness, all of that has created a capacity for wisdom and compassion that pure innocence doesn't possess. You have the playfulness of a child, but you also have the understanding that comes from having worked through fear, doubt, anger, and all the other challenging aspects of human experience. You can meet life's difficulties with lightness because you've learned they're not ultimately threatening to who you really are. This integration of wisdom and playfulness creates what Zen calls the beginner's mind, a way of approaching even familiar situations with fresh eyes and open curiosity. You've mastered the fundamentals of presence and awareness, but instead of making you rigid or predictable, this mastery allows you to be more flexible and responsive than ever before. It's like how a master chef can improvise a delicious meal from whatever ingredients are available, not because they ignore cooking principles, but because they understand them so deeply that they can adapt them creatively to any situation. The relationship with formal spiritual practice undergoes another transformation at this stage. You might still sit in meditation each morning, but it no longer feels like you're doing a meditation technique. It's simply your natural way of beginning the day, like stretching when you wake up, or drinking water when you're thirsty. Prayer or contemplative reading might still be part of your routine, but it doesn't feel like spiritual work anymore. It feels more like having a conversation with an old friend or tending a garden you love. The boundary between spiritual practice and ordinary living has become so thin that it's often impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. This naturally leads to what people sometimes call livelihood as practice, the recognition that whatever work you're called to do can become a vehicle for expressing and deepening awakening. Whether you're teaching school, running a business, raising children, or creating art, the activity itself becomes a form of meditation when approached from this level of presence and authenticity. You're not trying to escape from worldly responsibilities into some purely spiritual realm. Instead, you're discovering that every aspect of human life can become sacred when met with full awareness and genuine care. Relationships often flourish in entirely new ways during this stage. Because you're no longer struggling with your own inner conflicts, you have much more energy available for genuine connection with others. Because you're comfortable with your own emotions, you can be present with other people's feelings without getting overwhelmed or trying to fix them. Because you trust your own natural wisdom, you can respond authentically in each moment, rather than following scripts about how you're supposed to behave in relationships. People often comment that something feels different about you, though they might not be able to articulate exactly what has changed. You seem more relaxed, more genuinely yourself, more able to be fully present during conversations, instead of thinking about what to say next. There's a quality of ease and naturalness in your interactions that makes others feel more comfortable being themselves as well. You've become like that friend everyone wants to talk to when they're going through a difficult time, not because you give great advice, but because being around you somehow reminds people of their own inner strength and wisdom. The creative expression mentioned in the original poem isn't limited to artistic pursuits, though many people do find themselves drawn to music, writing, painting, or other forms of creative expression during this stage. The creativity that emerges is more fundamental than any particular medium. It's the natural result of living from authentic presence rather than from habit or conditioning. Every conversation becomes an opportunity for creative response. Every challenge becomes a chance to find new solutions. Every ordinary moment becomes a canvas for expressing the unique way awakening moves through your particular personality and circumstances. But the teaching reminds us that even this beautiful stage contains a subtle limitation. The seeker is riding the ox home, which means there's still a relationship between the one who rides and what is ridden. There's still a sense of someone who has achieved spiritual mastery, still a subtle pride in how naturally everything flows, still an identity built around being awakened. No matter how free and natural it feels, riding the ox is still a form of spiritual accomplishment, and any form of accomplishment contains the seeds of separation. This isn't to diminish the genuine freedom and joy that characterize this stage. The life that emerges here is deeply fulfilling, naturally beneficial to others, and represents a profound transformation from the suffering and seeking that initiated the journey. Many spiritual teachers seem to embody this stage, and their presence truly does inspire and guide others toward their own awakening. There's nothing wrong with reaching this level of integration and remaining here. It's a beautiful way to live that serves both your own highest potential and the welfare of everyone you encounter. Yet the tradition points towards something even deeper, something that emerges when even the most refined spiritual identity is recognized as another form of limitation. The path continues to unfold with its own mysterious logic, and eventually, our seeker will discover that even the joy of riding home contains a subtle form of bondage. Freedom, as long as it depends on anything, even the most sacred relationship with awakening itself, is not yet complete freedom. For now, though, our seeker plays their flute as evening settles over the landscape, and the music rises into the stars like an offering of pure gratitude. The ox moves with sure steps along paths that seem to appear effortlessly beneath their feet, and for the first time since the journey began, there's no question about the destination. Home isn't a place they're traveling toward. It's the quality of being they've learned to embody. The music continues, and anyone who hears it feels something ancient and familiar stirring in their own heart, calling them toward their own journey of awakening. But even as the melody rises into the infinite sky, something deeper than music is beginning to emerge, the recognition that the one who plays, the flute, and the music itself might not be separate things at all. The journey that began in confusion and desperation has led our seeker to the most unexpected destination of all. Not to some distant spiritual realm or elevated state of consciousness, but to the simple recognition that they are already home and always have been. The ox, that magnificent creature they spent so long chasing, catching, taming, and riding, stands peacefully beside them in a dawn light that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. For the first time in this entire story, both seeker and ox are completely at rest. The ancient poem captures this moment with profound simplicity. Astride the ox, I reach home. I am serene. The ox too can rest. The dawn has come. But this isn't the end of effort that comes from exhaustion or the peace that follows achievement. This is something much deeper, the recognition that the very idea of needing to get somewhere or become someone has been based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Home was never a destination to reach, because home is what you are. Peace was never a state to attain, because peace is the very ground of your being. If you've ever had one of those moments where you suddenly stop worrying about a problem you've been obsessing over for weeks, not because you solved it, but because you realized it wasn't actually a problem in the first place, you'll recognize something of what this stage reveals. All the spiritual seeking, all the effort to become awakened, all the practices and techniques and teachings, they weren't moving you towards something you didn't have. They were gradually removing the obstacles to recognizing what has been present all along. It's like spending years searching for your glasses while they're sitting on your head, then suddenly remembering to reach up and touch them. The seeker in our story sets down the whip and rope that have been their constant companions throughout this journey. These tools serve their purpose perfectly. They help navigate the relationship with awakening, when awakening still seemed like something separate, something to be managed and maintained. But now even the most skillful spiritual practices begin to feel like unnecessary complications. Not because practice is wrong or useless, but because the one who was practicing and that which was being practiced toward are revealed to be the same seamless reality. This letting go can feel both liberating and terrifying. So much identity has been built around being a spiritual seeker, someone on a path, someone working toward awakening. What happens when you realize there's nowhere to go and nothing to achieve? What happens when even the most profound spiritual experiences are seen as movements within the same awareness that's present when you're washing dishes or stuck in traffic? Who are you when you're no longer trying to become anyone at all? The Buddhist teaching at the heart of this stage is the recognition of what's called non-attachment but not in the way most people understand it. This isn't about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected from life. It's about recognizing that clinging to anything, even the most beautiful spiritual experiences, even enlightenment itself, creates a subtle form of suffering. As long as you're trying to maintain or protect or understand your awakening, there's still someone separate from awakening who needs to do the maintaining, protecting, and understanding. The tradition tells a story that illustrates this perfectly. A student asked the great Zen master Joshu, "When a person comes to you with nothing, what would you say to them?" Joshu replied without hesitation, "I would tell them to cast it away." Even nothing, even the complete absence of seeking, or striving, or spiritual ambition, can become something to hold on to, another subtle form of identity to maintain. True freedom emerges only when even the freedom from seeking is released. This might sound like philosophical wordplay, but it points to something that can be recognized directly in experience. Have you ever noticed that the most peaceful moments of your life often happen when you're not trying to be peaceful? When you're completely absorbed in watching a sunset, or lost in conversation with a dear friend, or fully engaged in some simple task, there's no one there monitoring the experience or trying to make it more spiritual. The very absence of someone trying to have an experience is what allows the natural peace and joy of pure being to shine through. At this stage, all the spiritual concepts that once seemed so important begin to reveal themselves as pointers that have served their purpose. The distinctions between inner and outer, spiritual and mundane, awakened and unawakened, conditioned and unconditioned. These were useful maps when you still believed you were lost and needed to find your way somewhere. But now they're seen as mental constructions that never touched the reality they were trying to describe. It's like using a ladder to climb onto a roof, then realizing you don't need to carry the ladder with you anymore. The conflict between these apparent opposites is revealed to have been a conflict of concepts, not a conflict of realities. Awareness doesn't struggle with thoughts. Thoughts simply appear and disappear within awareness. Peace doesn't fight with disturbance. Disturbance arises and passes away within the same peace that remains untouched by its presence. The awakened mind doesn't overcome the conditioned mind. It recognizes that both awakening and conditioning are movements within the same undivided consciousness. This recognition finally uproots what the Buddha called the fundamental cause of suffering, the desire to have experience be different than it is. Not because you become passive or resigned, but because you recognize that the one who was wanting experience to be different was itself a construction within experience. When there's no separate someone to be satisfied or dissatisfied, problems don't disappear, but they lose their grip on your sense of well-being. Challenges still arise, emotions still flow, life still includes its full spectrum of experiences, but none of them threaten the fundamental okayness that you recognize as your true nature. The German mystic Meister Eckhart described what happens at this stage with breathtaking clarity. God must pour himself according to the whole of his capacity into all those who have abandoned themselves to the very ground of their being. When you finally stop trying to manage your relationship with life when you release even the most subtle forms of spiritual effort and ambition, something extraordinary happens. The divine, call it God, Buddha nature, pure awareness, or simply what you most deeply are, can express itself without obstruction. Not because you've achieved something, but because you've finally stopped interfering with what has always been trying to express itself through your existence. This isn't a dramatic transformation that announces itself with fireworks and mystical visions. Often, it's so simple and natural that it almost feels disappointing at first. You might be sitting quietly and notice that the sense of someone sitting has dissolved into pure sitting. Or walking and realizing there's just walking happening with no walker separate from the activity. Or listening to music and discovering that the listener, the listening, and the music are one seamless flow of awareness expressing itself as sound. The body-mind that once felt so solid and separate begins to feel transparent, like a window that's so clean you can't tell it's there. The world, too, becomes transparent, not in the sense that it disappears, but in the sense that it's clearly recognized as appearance within the same awareness that you are. Subject and object, inside and outside, self and other, these distinctions still function perfectly well for practical purposes, but they're no longer experienced as fundamental realities. They're more like useful conventions, like lines of longitude and latitude that help you navigate, but don't actually divide the earth into separate pieces. This stage represents what you might call enlightenment without an enlightened person. There's profound clarity, unlimited compassion, natural wisdom, and spontaneous joy, but no one there to possess these qualities or take credit for them. It's like how sunlight illuminates everything it touches, without claiming ownership of the things it reveals. Awakening is simply the natural radiance of consciousness recognizing its own nature, not an achievement that belongs to anyone in particular. Yet even this profound recognition contains the seed of its own transcendence. As long as there's any sense of having reached somewhere special, of dwelling in enlightenment, of being established in awakeness, there's still the most subtle form of duality present. True freedom, the tradition suggests, emerges only when even the peace of this stage is seen as another movement within something even more fundamental. But for now, our seeker rests in the simple joy of finally being home, knowing that home was never anywhere else but here, never any time but now. The dawn light grows stronger as both seeker and ox settle into perfect stillness. The whip and rope lie forgotten in the grass, no longer needed, no longer even remembered. In this moment of complete arrival, something begins to stir that goes beyond both seeking and finding, beyond both journey and destination. The very categories of spiritual development begin to dissolve into something so simple and obvious that it almost seems to vanish. And in that near vanishing, the next stage of the path begins to reveal itself. What happens when even the most refined spiritual experiences dissolve into something so vast and simple that language can barely touch it? Our story reaches a place where the seeker, the ox, the whip, the rope, the journey itself, Everything that has given meaning and structure to this entire adventure quietly disappears into what the ancient poem calls no thing. Not nothing in the sense of empty space, but no thing in the sense of pure being that has no particular form, no specific content, no boundaries that separate it from anything else. If you've ever stood at the edge of the ocean at night and felt yourself dissolving into the vastness of stars and water and endless space, you might have tasted something of what this stage reveals. Or perhaps during deep meditation, you've experienced moments where the sense of being someone sitting somewhere simply evaporated, leaving only pure awareness with no center and no edges. Maybe it happened while you were absorbed in music so beautiful that the listener, the listening, and the music became one seamless flow of being, with no one left to experience the experience. These glimpses point toward what Buddhist teaching calls sunyata, emptiness, not as a blank void, but as the pregnant fullness that underlies all appearance. The original Zen poem describes this stage with breathtaking poetry. This heaven is so vast, no message can stain it. How may a snowflake exist in a raging fire? What this means is that the awareness revealed here is so fundamental, so all-encompassing, that no particular experience, no matter how profound or beautiful or terrible, can mark it or change it in any way. It's like asking how a cloud can stain the sky, or how a wave can damage the ocean. The cloud appears within the sky and is made of sky. The wave rises from the ocean and is made of ocean. And every experience arises within awareness and is made of awareness itself. This isn't a philosophical idea to think about. It's a direct recognition that can suddenly dawn in the most ordinary moments. You might be washing dishes when the sense of being someone doing something simply dissolves, leaving only the flow of warm water, the gentle scrubbing motion, and pure awareness that isn't separate from any of it. Or you could be walking and suddenly realize there's no walker, no path, no destination, just walking happening within the same vast presence that contains everything else. The snowflake of personal identity dissolves completely in the raging fire of pure being. What makes this stage so profound is that it reveals the deepest truth about what you've always been, beneath every identity you've ever worn, beneath every experience you've ever had, beneath every story you've ever told about yourself. Before you learned your name, before you developed preferences and opinions, before you became someone seeking spiritual awakening, this pure, unborn awareness was already completely present. Not as your essence, but as what you are before the question of essence or identity even arises. It's what was looking out through your eyes when you were 3 years old, what will be present when your body is no longer functioning, what remains constant through every change in your life circumstances. The teaching describes this as the footprints of the ancestors, which points to something beautiful and important. Every genuine spiritual teacher throughout history, every mystic who has touched this recognition, every ordinary person who has glimpsed their true nature, they've all recognized this same placeless place, this same timeless awareness that has no particular characteristics, yet expresses itself as everything that appears. The Buddha's awakening under the Bodhi tree, Christ's recognition in the desert, the insights of countless unknown seekers, they all point to this same fundamental reality that can never be captured in concepts, but can be directly known. But here's where this teaching becomes both profound and practical for your everyday life. This isn't some special spiritual state that you visit occasionally during peak experiences. This vast unborn awareness is what you are right now, reading these words, hearing these sounds, feeling whatever sensations are present in your body. The only difference between ordinary moments and this recognition is that most of the time, attention is so focused on the content of experience that the awareness in which all content appears is overlooked. It's like being so absorbed in watching a movie that you forget about the screen, even though the screen is present for every single scene. This stage can feel both liberating and unsettling. On one hand, there's profound relief in discovering that your deepest nature is completely untouchable by any of life's difficulties. Anxiety, sadness, physical pain, loss, failure, none of these can actually damage what you most fundamentally are, any more than clouds can harm the sky they appear within. There's a quality of absolute safety in recognizing yourself as the awareness that remains present and untouched, regardless of what's appearing within it. On the other hand, this recognition can initially feel like a kind of cosmic loneliness. If you are this vast, undifferentiated awareness, what happened to your personality, your relationships, your individual life? It can feel like everything that seemed important and meaningful has been revealed as somehow illusory or insignificant. This is why the tradition warns that reaching this stage too quickly, without adequate preparation, can be destabilizing rather than liberating. But there's something crucial to understand about this apparent emptiness. It's not the emptiness of absence, but the emptiness of infinite fullness. Like the silence between musical notes that makes the music possible, or the space between words that allows meaning to emerge, this emptiness is pregnant with unlimited creative potential. Everything you've ever experienced, every thought, every emotion, every sensation, every relationship has emerged from this same source and will return to this same source. Nothing is lost in this recognition. Everything is revealed to be more intimate than you ever imagined. The great Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna warned about a particular danger at this stage. He said that people who cling to form can be helped through recognizing emptiness, but those who cling to emptiness are beyond all help. What this means is that it's possible to make this profound recognition into another spiritual achievement, another identity to maintain. I am the void. I am pure awareness. I have realized the ultimate truth. These can become the most subtle and persistent forms of spiritual ego. Even more challenging, it's possible to use this recognition as a way to avoid the fullness of human life. If everything is empty, if nothing ultimately matters, if all experiences are equally illusory, why engage with relationships, creativity, service, or any of the rich possibilities of embodied existence? This spiritual bypassing can create a kind of detached emptiness that feels wise, but is actually a form of hiding from the complete embrace of what it means to be human. The tradition is clear that this stage, profound as it is, represents a kind of spiritual halfway house. Early versions of the ox-herding pictures actually ended here, with the recognition of ultimate emptiness as the completion of the path. But the Master Kakuan, in his wisdom, recognized that stopping here misses something essential about the nature of awakening. True freedom doesn't mean escaping from the world of form into formless awareness. True freedom means recognizing that form and emptiness, fullness and void, ordinary life, and ultimate truth are not two different things. This is why the path continues beyond this profound dissolution. The recognition of emptiness is crucial. It reveals the unborn, undying nature of your deepest being and frees you from the fear that anything can ultimately threaten what you really are. But awakening isn't about remaining in this placeless place forever. It's about discovering how this emptiness and the fullness of ordinary life are one seamless reality, expressing itself in countless beautiful ways. As our story reaches this pivotal moment, the seeker, the ox, and the entire journey dissolve into a silence so complete that even silence isn't the right word for it. There's no one left to have achieved anything, no path that was traveled, no destination that was reached. Yet somehow, within this vast no-thingness, something begins to stir, not a return to form, but a recognition that emptiness and fullness were never actually separate. The raging fire that dissolved the snowflake begins to reveal itself as the very source from which new snowflakes endlessly emerge. And in that recognition, the next phase of the journey quietly begins to unfold. After the vast dissolution of the 8th stage, something unexpected and wonderful begins to happen. Our story doesn't end in that formless emptiness, suspended forever in the void beyond all experience. Instead, slowly and naturally, like the first light of dawn touching familiar hills, the world begins to reappear. But now everything is different, even though nothing has changed at all. The ancient poem captures this return with words that might initially sound like regret. Too many steps have been taken returning to the root and the source. Better to have been blind and deaf from the beginning. But this isn't the bitter complaint of someone who wasted their time. It's the gentle laughter of recognition, the same kind of laugh you might have when you find your car keys in the first place you looked, after searching the entire house. Of course, you think, they were right here all along. The seeker in our story finds themselves standing once again in the ordinary world, but it's as if they're seeing it for the first time. There's a river flowing nearby, just as there always was, and flowers blooming along its banks in brilliant red, just as they always have. The same sun that was shining when this journey began is still shining now. The same wind that rustled through the tall grass in that first stage of desperate searching is still moving through the trees. But now, these simple, ordinary phenomena are recognized as the very source and summit of all spiritual realization. If you've ever returned to your childhood neighborhood after many years away, you might recognize something of what this stage reveals. The houses look smaller than you remembered. The streets seem narrower, but there's also something magical about seeing familiar places with adult eyes. You recognize the same swing set where you played as a child, but now you also see the love and care that went into creating a safe place for children to explore and grow. The ordinary becomes sacred, not because it has changed, but because you have developed the eyes to see the sacredness that was always present. This stage represents one of the most profound teachings in all of Buddhism. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. In the previous stage, you discovered the emptiness that underlies all appearances, that vast, unborn awareness in which everything arises and passes away. Now you discover that this emptiness doesn't exist somewhere else, behind or beyond the world of ordinary experience. The flowing river, the red flowers, the sound of birds, the feeling of your breath moving in and out, these aren't separate from ultimate reality. They are ultimate reality, expressing itself in countless beautiful and ordinary ways. This recognition often comes with a quality of profound ordinariness that can initially feel almost disappointing. After all the seeking, all the spiritual experiences, all the glimpses of transcendent truth, you find yourself back where you started, washing dishes, paying bills, having conversations with friends and family. But now these simple activities are suffused with a wonder and completeness that no exotic spiritual experience could provide. Washing dishes becomes a meditation on the miracle of water, warmth, and cleanliness. Paying bills becomes an expression of gratitude for the complex web of relationships that makes modern life possible. Ordinary conversations become opportunities to meet the divine, expressing itself through human personality and connection. The poem speaks of dwelling in one's true abode, unconcerned with and without. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent or detached from life, but rather discovering a way of being that's naturally at ease with whatever arises. There's no longer the anxious monitoring of experience to see whether it's spiritual enough, peaceful enough, or awakened enough. Instead, there's a quality of unconditional okayness that recognizes every moment as a perfect expression of the same source that you are. This is where you finally understand what all the great spiritual teachers meant when they pointed toward presence, toward here and now, toward the sacred in the ordinary. It wasn't that you needed to achieve some special state or have some extraordinary experience. You needed to stop looking elsewhere for what was always right here. Stop trying to become someone other than who you already are. Stop seeking in the future what is always available in this moment. The source of all peace, all joy, all love, all wisdom, it was never hidden anywhere else but in the simple fact of being aware, right here, right now. The great poet T.S. Eliot captured this perfectly when he wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." This is exactly what happens at this stage of the journey. You haven't traveled anywhere. You haven't become anyone new. You haven't acquired anything that wasn't already present. But you've learned to see clearly what was always here, always available, always closer than your own breath. This recognition transforms your relationship with what the tradition calls the mystery. Previously, mystery was something you needed to solve, truth was something you needed to discover, and enlightenment was something you needed to achieve. But now you recognize that the mystery isn't a problem to be solved. It's the very nature of existence itself. Every moment is infinitely mysterious, not because it's complicated or hidden, but because it's so simple and obvious that it can never be fully grasped by the thinking mind. How is it that you're aware? How does consciousness arise from matter, or matter from consciousness? How does love emerge from two people meeting? How does meaning appear from the arrangement of marks on a page or sounds in the air? These aren't questions that need answers. They're koans that point toward the inexhaustible wonder of ordinary existence. Your relationship with spiritual practice undergoes its final transformation at this stage. If you still meditate, it's not because you need to achieve anything or maintain any particular state of consciousness. It's simply an expression of appreciation for the miracle of awareness itself, like stopping to admire a beautiful sunset or taking a moment to feel grateful for your health. If you still read spiritual teachings, it's not because you're seeking information you don't have, but because you enjoy the way truth recognizes itself when expressed through different voices and perspectives. If you still engage with spiritual community, it's not because you need support for your practice, but because there's joy in recognizing your own true nature reflected in others who have made the same journey home to themselves. The tradition often speaks of this stage as the pathless path, because you finally understand that there was never actually anywhere to go. The path was simply the process of removing all the obstacles to recognizing what was always already present. It's like polishing a mirror. The mirror's capacity to reflect was never absent, but it couldn't function clearly until all the dust and grime were carefully removed. Your true nature was never lost or damaged or in need of improvement. It just needed to be freed from all the mental and emotional patterns that were obscuring its natural radiance. This is why the poem suggests it would have been better to have been blind and deaf from the beginning. If you had never learned to seek spiritual experiences elsewhere, if you had never developed the idea that enlightenment was something special and exotic, if you had never started believing that your ordinary awareness wasn't already perfect and complete, you might have recognized the treasure that was always here. But of course, for most of us, the journey of seeking and finding seems to be necessary. We need to exhaust all the places where happiness can't be found before we're willing to look in the one place where it always is. The beauty of this stage is how it reframes your entire life history. Every mistake you ever made, every time you got lost in suffering or confusion, every moment when you felt separate from love or peace, all of it is revealed to have been movements within the same perfect awareness that you are. Your struggles weren't obstacles to awakening. They were awakening exploring what it's like to temporarily forget itself. Your seeking wasn't a sign that something was missing. It was wholeness playing hide and seek with itself. Your entire journey wasn't a detour from truth. It was truth experiencing itself from countless different perspectives. This recognition brings with it a quality of compassion that has no object and needs no reason. When you see clearly that everyone is already the source they're seeking, when you recognize that every person's struggles are just consciousness exploring different ways of temporarily forgetting its own nature, judgment becomes almost impossible. How can you judge someone for being lost when you know that lostness is just another form of the same awareness that expresses itself as clarity? How can you be impatient with someone's suffering when you recognize that suffering is just love that has temporarily forgotten how to recognize itself? The The quiet wonder that characterizes this stage often expresses itself through an appreciation for simple, natural beauty that might seem almost childlike to others. You might find yourself stopping to watch clouds moving across the sky, not because you're trying to have a spiritual experience, but because the movement of clouds through space is inherently fascinating and beautiful. You might spend long minutes watching water flow over rocks in a stream, not seeking any insight or meaning, but simply enjoying the endless creativity with which existence expresses itself. The most ordinary moments, drinking a cup of tea, listening to rain on the roof, feeling sunlight warm your skin, become occasions for quiet celebration of the mystery that expresses itself as everything you experience. People sometimes ask what the practical value of this recognition is, how it helps with the real challenges of human life. The answer is both simple and profound. When you know yourself to be the source of peace rather than someone who sometimes achieves peaceful states, your relationship with difficulty becomes completely different. Challenges still arise, problems still need to be solved, losses still bring grief, but none of these can threaten your fundamental well-being, because you know your fundamental well-being doesn't depend on circumstances. You respond to life from resourcefulness rather than from neediness, from love rather than from fear, from creativity rather than from desperation. As this stage deepens, there's often a growing sense that while the journey of awakening is complete, life itself is just beginning. Not life as a search for something missing, but life as the spontaneous expression of fullness that has finally recognized itself. The river flows tranquilly on, the flowers continue to bloom in brilliant red, and awareness continues to express itself as the endless dance of ordinary existence. But now there's someone awake within the dance, someone who knows that the dancer, the dancing, and what's being danced are all movements of the same inexhaustible source. Our seeker stands by the flowing river, no longer seeking anything, no longer trying to become anyone, no longer going anywhere. The source they spent so long trying to find was never anywhere but here, never any time but now, never anyone but who they've always been. In the gentle sound of water moving over stones, in the bright color of flowers blooming in the sun, in the simple fact of being aware of it all, the entire spiritual journey reveals itself to have been consciousness playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with itself. And now the game is over, not because anything was won or lost, but because it's time for a new kind of play to begin. The final movement of our story might be the most surprising of all. After touching the very source of existence, after recognizing the ultimate nature of reality, after transcending every form of seeking and striving, where does our journey lead? Not to some mountaintop monastery or hidden cave where enlightenment can be preserved in perfect isolation. Instead, it leads right back into the heart of ordinary human life, but with a quality of presence that transforms everything it touches. The ancient poem paints this beautifully. Barefooted and naked of breast, I mingle with the people of the world. My clothes are ragged and dust, laden, and I am ever blissful. This isn't the image of spiritual accomplishment that most people expect. There's no special robes or sacred symbols, no aura of otherworldly wisdom, No separation from the messy, complicated, wonderfully human world that most of us inhabit. Instead, there's someone who looks completely ordinary on the outside, but carries within them a quality of joy and peace that seems to awaken the same possibilities in everyone they encounter. If you've ever met someone like this, someone who seemed to have no agenda, no need to impress anyone, no anxiety about how they appeared to others, but whose very presence made you feel more relaxed and authentic yourself, you've encountered this final stage of awakening in action. They might have been a checkout clerk who somehow made standing in line feel like a moment of genuine human connection. Or a teacher who created a classroom atmosphere where every student felt safe to be curious and make mistakes. Or simply a friend who had that rare quality of being completely present during conversations, making you feel like you were the most interesting person in the world. This represents what spiritual traditions call embodied awakening, the integration of ultimate realization with the full embrace of human existence. It's one thing to recognize your true nature during meditation or in moments of spiritual insight. It's quite another to live from that recognition while dealing with traffic jams, difficult relationships, work pressures, health challenges, and all the other realities that make up a human life. This final stage shows us what it looks like when someone has learned to be completely awake while remaining completely human. The description of being barefooted and naked of breast points to a profound simplicity that goes much deeper than just wearing simple clothes. This is someone who has stopped trying to present a particular image to the world, stopped marketing themselves as spiritual or wise or special in any way. They've become so comfortable with who they really are that they no longer need to hide behind roles or personas or achievements. Like a child who hasn't yet learned to be self-conscious, they interact with the world with complete authenticity, without calculating how they're being perceived or what impression they're making. Christ spoke directly to this quality when he told his followers, "Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." This isn't about becoming naive or irresponsible, but about recovering the natural openness, curiosity, and unself-conscious authenticity that children embody before they learn to worry about status and image. Watch a healthy child at play, and you'll see someone who is completely absorbed in whatever they're doing, finding wonder in the simplest things, responding to each moment with fresh enthusiasm rather than predetermined expectations. This final stage of spiritual development is essentially about becoming this kind of person again, wise from experience, but simple in heart. The ragged clothes mentioned in the poem don't necessarily mean poverty, though they might. More importantly, they represent someone who has completely let go of using external things to define their worth or communicate their status. Whether they're wearing expensive clothes or thrift store finds, driving a luxury car or riding the bus, living in a mansion or a tiny apartment, their sense of well-being and identity remains completely unaffected by these externals. They've discovered something so fulfilling within themselves that the endless game of acquisition and status that drives most of society has simply lost its appeal. But here's what makes this stage so remarkable. Despite appearing completely ordinary, perhaps even unremarkable, These people have an almost magical effect on everyone around them. The poem says they use no magic to extend life, yet, before me, the dead trees become alive. This points to one of the most beautiful mysteries of human existence, how someone who has found genuine peace and authenticity within themselves naturally awakens those same qualities in others, without trying to do anything at all. You might have experienced this phenomenon yourself. Perhaps you've been around someone who was so genuinely comfortable with themselves that you found yourself relaxing defenses you didn't even know you were carrying. Or you've encountered someone whose natural joy and presence reminded you of possibilities within yourself that you'd forgotten were there. They weren't trying to teach you anything or fix you or improve you. They were simply being themselves. But something about their way of being in the world awakened something dormant in you, like a tuning fork, causing another tuning fork to vibrate at the same frequency. The tradition speaks of this as teaching through being rather than through words. When someone has truly integrated their awakening into everyday life, their very presence becomes a teaching. Not because they're trying to enlighten anyone, but because authenticity and peace are naturally contagious. When you're around someone who has stopped pretending, stopped performing, stopped trying to be anything other than who they are, it gives you permission to do the same. When you encounter someone who has found genuine contentment within themselves, it reminds you that such contentment is possible for you too. The great meditation teacher Chogyam Trungpa described this beautifully. Its action is like the moon reflecting in 100 bowls of water. The moon has no desire to reflect, but that is its nature. When someone has fully awakened to their true nature, they naturally reflect that awakening into every interaction, every relationship, every situation they encounter. Not because they're trying to be helpful or spiritual, but because clarity and compassion have become their natural way of being in the world. Like the moon that shines equally on palace and garbage dump, saints and criminals, they offer the same quality of presence to everyone they meet. This doesn't mean they become passive or ineffective in addressing the world's problems. In fact, the opposite often happens because they're no longer motivated by ego needs or unconscious reactivity. They become much more skillful at responding to whatever situations arise. They can engage with conflict without getting lost in drama, offer help without getting drained by others' problems, and speak truth without being attached to whether anyone listens. Their actions arise from wisdom and love, rather than from fear or the need to prove anything, making them naturally more effective at whatever they choose to do. The ancient commentary mentions that such a person is found in company with wine bibbers and butchers. He and they are all converted into Buddhas. This points to something radical about this final stage. There's no sense of spiritual superiority, no need to surround yourself only with other awakened people or supposedly pure environments. Someone at this level of integration recognizes the Buddha nature in everyone they meet, regardless of their behavior, beliefs, or life circumstances. They can sit comfortably with the homeless person on the street corner and the CEO in the boardroom, finding the same essential humanity in both. This quality of unconditional acceptance doesn't mean becoming a doormat or failing to maintain healthy boundaries. It means recognizing that every person's behavior arises from their current level of understanding and their particular circumstances, and that judgment rarely helps anyone grow or change. When you truly understand that everyone is doing the best they can from their current perspective, it becomes natural to respond with compassion rather than criticism, understanding rather than condemnation. This doesn't make you naive about harmful behavior, but it allows you to address problems from love rather than from anger or fear. Dostoevsky once wrote that the soul is healed by being with children, and this points to exactly what happens when you encounter someone who has reached this final stage of development. There's something about their unguarded presence, their natural joy, their lack of agenda or pretense that reminds you of your own original nature before it got covered over by social conditioning and psychological defenses. Spending time with them is healing not because they're trying to heal you, but because their authenticity awakens your own authenticity. Their peace reminds you of your own natural peace. What makes this stage so beautiful is how it completes the circle of the entire journey. Remember how this story began, with someone feeling lost and confused, searching desperately for something they couldn't name, exhausted from trying to find happiness in all the wrong places. Now, after traveling through all 10 stages, they've returned to ordinary human life, but with a quality of presence that transforms the ordinary into the sacred. They're not different from other people in any external way, but they've discovered the source of peace and joy that exists within everyone, and their very being reminds others that this same discovery is available to them. The final fruit of all spiritual seeking isn't some exotic state of consciousness or supernatural ability. It's simply becoming a fully authentic human being, someone who has stopped pretending, stopped performing, stopped trying to be anyone other than who they really are. This sounds simple, but it's actually extraordinarily rare and precious. Most people spend their entire lives wearing masks, playing roles, trying to live up to images of who they think they should be. Someone who has genuinely let go of all that pretense and learned to live from their authentic nature becomes a gift to everyone they encounter. This is why the tradition calls this stage the return to society, rather than the retreat from it. True awakening doesn't separate you from the world. It allows you to engage with the world more fully, more lovingly, more skillfully than ever before. You're no longer protecting yourself from life's challenges because you know that nothing can ultimately threaten what you really are. You're no longer trying to get something from other people because you've found the source of fulfillment within yourself. This freedom allows you to show up in relationships and situations with a quality of presence that serves everyone involved. The journey that began with desperate seeking ends with effortless being. The person who once pushed aside tall grass searching for something they couldn't name now walks among people, barefoot and blissful, causing dead trees to bloom simply by being authentically themselves. They've discovered that what they were seeking all along wasn't somewhere else. It was who they already were, hidden beneath layers of conditioning and confusion. And now, by living from that recognition, they naturally awaken the same possibility in everyone whose life they touch. Our story ends not with some dramatic spiritual climax, but with the most profound ordinariness imaginable. Someone completely at peace with themselves, completely comfortable in their own skin, moving through the world with no agenda except to be authentically present to whatever arises. Children laugh when they see them coming. Strangers find themselves smiling for no reason they can explain. And somehow, in ways both subtle and mysterious, the world becomes a little brighter, a little kinder, a little more awake, simply because they're in it. This is the ultimate fruit of the spiritual journey, not escape from humanity, but the full flowering of what it means to be human. In the end, they are neither seeking nor found, neither student nor teacher, neither ordinary nor enlightened. They are simply and completely themselves, and that turns out to be the greatest gift anyone can offer to the world. As we reach the end of this ancient journey together, something beautiful has happened in the space between us. Over these past 3 hours, we've walked alongside the seeker through confusion and clarity, struggle and ease, seeking and finding, until finally arriving at the most profound ordinariness imaginable. But this isn't just their story. It's the universal map of how consciousness awakens to its own nature, how any human being can discover the peace and wholeness that exists within them. And somewhere in these 10 stages, you've likely recognized your own experience, your own longings, your own moments of recognition and confusion. What we've explored tonight isn't just ancient wisdom preserved in beautiful poetry and imagery. It's a living teaching that speaks directly to the challenges and possibilities of modern life. Whether you came here seeking better sleep, relief from stress and anxiety, or genuine curiosity about the deeper dimensions of human experience, these stages offer something practical and transformative. They show us that the peace we're all seeking isn't dependent on changing our circumstances, achieving our goals, or even solving our problems. It's available right here, right now, as close as your own awareness of these words. Think back to that first stage, where our seeker stood exhausted in the tall grass, feeling completely lost and overwhelmed. Perhaps you recognize something of your own experience there, those moments when life feels like too much, when the strategies you've been using to find happiness aren't working anymore, when you sense there must be something more but don't know where to look. That feeling, uncomfortable as it is, represents the beginning of wisdom. It's your inner knowing that you're capable of something deeper than just going through the motions of life. The great doubt that characterizes that first stage isn't something to be fixed or overcome quickly. It's actually a sacred pause, a moment when life itself is asking you to consider whether there might be a different way to approach the whole question of human happiness and fulfillment. If you're experiencing any version of this doubt in your own life, whether it shows up as depression, anxiety, restlessness, or simply a persistent sense that something is missing, honor it. Don't try to distract yourself from it or medicate it away too quickly. Let it ask its questions, because those questions are pointing you toward your own journey of awakening. The footprint stage reminds us that we're not the first people to feel lost, and we won't be the first to find our way home. All around you, in books and conversations, in art and music, in nature, and even in your dreams, there are signs that others have walked this path before you. Sometimes these signs appear in the most unexpected places. A casual comment from a stranger, a line in a song that seems to speak directly to your heart, a moment in nature when you suddenly feel connected to something vast and loving. Pay attention to these footprints, because they're not coincidences. They're the universe's way of letting you know that you're on the right track, that the longing you feel is pointing you towards something real and attainable. When you catch your first clear glimpse of your own peaceful nature, that third stage moment when the ox finally becomes visible, remember that this is just the beginning, not the end, of the journey. Many people make the mistake of thinking that one profound spiritual experience means they've graduated from the need for any further practice or development. But the tradition is clear that seeing is one thing, and learning to live consistently from what you've seen is quite another. Don't be discouraged if that initial clarity seems to fade, or if old patterns of reactivity return. This is completely normal and doesn't mean you've lost anything or failed in any way. The struggle stage that follows can be one of the most challenging aspects of any spiritual path, but it's also where the real transformation happens. This is where you develop what could be called your awakening muscles, the capacity to remain present and aware, even when life gets difficult, even when old emotional patterns are triggered, even when the peaceful clarity you glimpsed seems impossibly distant. Every time you notice you've been lost in mental drama and gently return to presence, you're strengthening this capacity. Every time you catch yourself reacting from old patterns and choose to respond from awareness instead, you're deepening your ability to live from your true nature. Be patient with this process, because it takes time for deep conditioning to unravel. You're not trying to become someone you're not. You're learning to stop being who you never were in the first place. You're not trying to create peace. You're learning to stop disturbing the peace that's already here. You're not trying to manufacture love and wisdom. You're removing the obstacles to the love and wisdom that are your natural condition. This work happens gradually, gently, the way morning light slowly fills a room without forcing the darkness away. As your practice matures and you enter those middle stages where effort becomes effortless and struggle transforms into flow, you might find yourself tempted to think you've reached the end of the path. Life becomes so much easier, relationships improve, stress decreases, and you develop a sustainable way to remain present and peaceful, even in challenging circumstances. This is genuinely wonderful, and it represents a profound accomplishment that many people never taste. But the teaching reminds us that even this beautiful integration can become a subtle form of limitation if we cling to it as our final destination. The deeper stages of the journey involve letting go of even the most refined spiritual identities and achievements. This doesn't mean abandoning practice or becoming careless about your inner development. It means discovering a freedom so complete that it doesn't depend on maintaining any particular state of consciousness or level of spiritual attainment. True freedom isn't freedom from difficulty. It's the recognition that your essential nature remains untouched by whatever difficulties arise. It's like discovering that you are the sky, not the weather patterns that move through it. For most of us, glimpsing these deeper recognitions is enough to transform how we live, even if we don't fully embody them consistently. Just knowing that such freedom is possible just understanding that peace doesn't depend on circumstances, just recognizing that your deepest nature is already complete and whole. This knowledge itself becomes a source of tremendous relief and empowerment. You might still experience stress, sadness, fear, and all the other challenges of human life, but you'll never again be completely convinced that these experiences define who you are or determine your fundamental well-being. The final stages show us that the goal of spiritual development isn't to escape from ordinary human life, but to engage with it more fully, more authentically, more lovingly than ever before. The person who completes this journey doesn't become superhuman. They become deeply, genuinely human. They're no longer trying to maintain a spiritual image or live up to enlightened ideals. They're simply comfortable being exactly who they are, and that authenticity becomes a gift to everyone they encounter. As you move forward from this evening, remember that you don't need to walk this entire path perfectly or achieve every stage we've explored. Even understanding the map changes your relationship with your own experience. Even knowing that others have traveled this way before you provides comfort during difficult times. Even glimpsing the possibility that peace might be closer than you thought can begin to transform how you approach the challenges and opportunities of your daily life. Your own journey will likely unfold in ways that don't match this ancient map exactly. You might experience several stages simultaneously, or find yourself moving back and forth between different levels of recognition and confusion. You might have insights that don't fit neatly into any category, or discover aspects of awakening that weren't included in these traditional teachings. This is perfectly natural and doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. The map is meant to guide and encourage, not to limit or define your experience. What matters most is that you trust your own deepest knowing and remain open to whatever wants to emerge in your life. The same awareness that guided our ancient seeker through their journey is present within you right now, reading these words, hearing these sounds, aware of whatever thoughts and feelings are arising in this moment. That awareness itself is what you've been seeking all along, not as something to attain, but as something to recognize. Not as a future possibility, but as a present reality. Some practical suggestions as you continue your own exploration. Begin each day with a few moments of simple presence, not trying to achieve any particular state, just noticing that you're aware and allowing that awareness to be enough. Throughout the day, practice returning attention to the present moment whenever you notice you've been lost in mental commentary about the past or future. When difficult emotions arise, see if you can make space for them rather than immediately trying to fix or change them. When you encounter other people, experiment with seeing them as fellow travelers on the same journey toward peace and understanding. Remember that this isn't about becoming a perfect person or achieving some permanent state of enlightenment. It's about gradually developing a more intimate relationship with your own natural wisdom and compassion. It's about learning to trust the peace that's always available within you, regardless of what's happening around you. It's about discovering that the love you've been seeking everywhere else is actually the very fabric of your own being. The Buddha once said something that perfectly captures the spirit of this journey. What you seek is seeking you. The peace you long for is longing for you. The love you want to experience wants to express itself through your life. The wisdom you hope to discover is already present within your deepest knowing. The freedom you dream of is your natural condition, temporarily obscured but never actually lost. As we close this time together, take a moment to appreciate how far you've already traveled on your own path. The very fact that you're here, listening to these teachings, opening yourself to possibilities beyond the conventional approaches to happiness, this itself is evidence of the awakening that's already stirring within you. You might not feel particularly enlightened or transformed, but something has shifted simply by spending these hours contemplating the deeper dimensions of human existence. That shift, however subtle, is precious and real. Rest now in the knowledge that you are both the seeker and what is sought, both the student and the teacher, both the question and the answer. Your journey continues not because something is missing, but because consciousness delights in exploring its own infinite nature through countless unique expressions like you. Let yourself be exactly where you are, exactly who you are, exactly as aware as you are in this moment. This is enough. You are enough. This moment is enough. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler. The path continues tomorrow, but for now, simply rest in the peace that has been with you all along.